Thank you for being present at this evening, Wednesday, April 24th, public information session on draft bylaws 767-2024 and the proposed changes to 4 urban planning bylaws relating to zoning, subdivision, permits, and certificates, and SPAPE, which is the site planning and architectural integration, and also on the bylaw 768-2024 on comprehensive development programs. This presentation will also include the presentation on the consultation report prepared by Marie-Hélène Gauthier, who is here with us this evening. I wish to thank Council and the town directors and staff for their agility, their willingness, their courage, and the quality of their person, the respect they carry when answering some very difficult questions. Some of the gist of the negative comments that I received or that I have seen come back were founded more in the lack of justification for the need for these regulations, and also that the proposals seem to be rushed and short on preparation. So why the RCI? There really should be no surprise that it has been the intent of this council since the start of our term to improve the framework to better support the often fragile balance between environmental protection and development. At the onset, our intent was to control or reduce clear-cutting of lots and the loss of areas such as wetlands and woodlands, providing environmental services while also to improve the town's leadership and control in the planning of land use and occupation. In this way, beginning to insert into our normative regulations the findings and recommendations the town has been accumulating over the years through multiple characterization and iterations of characterizations and conservation plans done for Hudson, namely Technica in 2009, the CIMA Plus in 2017, EcoHerb in 2021. Meanwhile, the conservation plan in 2016 only covered the urban sector and had removed the areas slated for development. So I believe that we can all agree that rapid action was needed. Also, the provisions in the law continued to strengthen our powers towards greater leadership and mastering of municipal controls for better environmental protection, ensuring that we leave in this a legacy for the next generations and continue to mitigate and better prepare for the increasing impact from climate change and thereby loss of predictability. This is a shared burden and responsibility, and we all need to work on this together. As mentioned in my February 17th, 2024 letter sent to all Hudson addresses, it is clear that Hudson not only cares about environmental protections, but also on how this is achieved. Your comments were the substance from which the revisions to the draft bylaws that you will see tonight were generated. Following the consultation period, Council received the consultation report, including the consolidation of your comments on March 8th of 2024. Following the reception of the report, there was a series of working sessions between Council and the town's technical team in March and April. Tonight, as promised, the results of the process will be presented where the adoption of the final bylaws are expected to take place at the next regular council meeting on May 6th of 2024. The process from draft adoption on January 10th to final adoption on May 6th will have taken almost 4 months. So tonight, Marie-Hélène Gauthier will present the consultation report, providing the compilation of the results and synopsis of comments received per survey questions. In the second part, Melissa Francis will go through each item in the draft bylaws, which was captured in the consultation process and where changes were made or the requirements maintained. On my end, a few reflections I have carried over the last few months are the following. I have come to understand that not in my backyard is not simply against development. It is also about the freedom of users and owners on their own private property. The sense of private property is very strong in Hudson, and though much has changed at the provincial level and in legal jurisprudence and beyond, I have also come to the realization that the town and myself have a duty to demystify, to clarify, and to bridge the gap between information that may be more readily available, accessible, or read, which unfortunately is available only in French on public information sources and paramunicipal organizations. So we will continue to communicate better and to continue to work with you and to work on these public participation processes with you. It is important that we bring you along through these improvements and that we continue to work together. So without further ado, we are now moving on to the presentations of Ms. Gauthier and Francis.
So here's the presentation of the report. Alors, c'est la présentation du rapport de la consultation publique. Oh, I'm sorry. Alors, les objectifs de la démarche de participation publique étaient dans un premier temps d'informer la population quant aux nouvelles dispositions apportées par les projets de règlement, communiquer de façon transparente des informations pertinentes et nécessaires à la compréhension des projets de règlement, encourager et faciliter la participation citoyenne en proposant une diversité d'activités et permettre aux citoyens et citoyennes d'exprimer leur opinion, leurs préoccupations, leurs attentes et leurs idées dans un esprit constructif. Alors, the objectives of the participation process was to inform the population about the new provisions introduced by the draft bylaws, communicate transparently the relevant and necessary information required to understand these draft bylaws, encourage and facilitate citizens' participation by offering a variety of activities, and allow citizens to express their opinions, concerns, expectations, and ideas in a constructive spirit. Il y a eu 3 phases de participation dans la démarche. Premièrement, il y a eu des portes ouvertes dont l'objectif était de permettre aux citoyens et aux citoyennes de s'informer et d'obtenir réponse à leurs questions. Au total, il y a eu près de 100 participants qui se sont présentés aux portes ouvertes. Ça a été suivi par une soirée de consultation qui se voulait de nature informative et participative. Il y avait plus de 150 participants présents lors de cette soirée. Et ensuite, il y a eu la période de consultation qui consistait en un questionnaire permettant aux citoyens et citoyennes de se prononcer sur les nouvelles dispositions et leur faire part de leurs commentaires. Et il y a eu plus de 790 personnes qui ont répondu au questionnaire et plus de 465 commentaires ont été émis. Donc, on peut dire qu'il y a eu une belle participation. So there was 3 stages for the participation process. First, it was the open houses, and the goal was to provide an opportunity for citizens to inform themselves and to get answers to their question. About 100 participants showed up to these open houses. It was followed by a consultation evening that was meant to be informative and I have a hard time with this word, participatory. And there was more than 150 participants that evening. Then it was followed by a consultation period, which was made of a questionnaire allowing citizens to express their views on the new provisions and to provide their comments. There was more than 790 persons who responded to the questionnaire, and more than 465 comments were submitted. So we can say it was a success. Alors maintenant, comment est-ce que les personnes, les citoyens ont été au courant de ce processus-là? Alors, sous quelle forme les invitations ont été faites? Premièrement, il y a eu une distribution d'un pamphlet à chaque résidence sur le territoire de la ville d'Hudson. Il y a eu un envoi d'un info express à tous les abonnés, un envoi d'une correspondance personnalisée à tous les groupes et associations d'Hudson pour inviter à mobiliser leurs membres, communication avec les acteurs clés pour les informer sur le processus de participation publique et des portes ouvertes. Et il y a eu des annonces sur le site web de la ville et sur sa page Facebook. So how did people hear about the public consultation process? First, there was a distribution of a pamphlet to each residence in the town of Hudson. There was a sending of an info express to all email subscribers, sending personalized correspondence to all groups and associations in Hudson to invite them to mobilize their members, communication with key stakeholders to inform them about the public participation process and open houses, announcement on the Times website and its Facebook page. Alors, Est-ce que cette forme de processus de participation publique, quel a été le niveau de satisfaction à ces activités-là? Alors, premièrement, pour les portes ouvertes, plus de 50% sont satisfaits sur cette façon d'informer les citoyennes et le taux aurait été plus élevé parce qu'un des éléments d'insatisfaction était la différence dans les réponses données aux mêmes questions par les experts présents. Alors, if we look at the level of satisfaction with the public participation activities, when it comes to the open houses, over 50% express support to this form of this way of information. And it could have been higher if the difference in responses given to the same questions by the expert present were the same. So that was a point that was raised that could explain why some people were not happy with the open houses. Maintenant, par rapport aux activités à la soirée de consultation et de dialogue public, les résultats sont mitigés. Principalement, les répondants se sont plutôt concentrés sur le contenu et non pas sur le contenant. Donc, ils ont été nombreux à souligner la nécessité d'adopter ces projets de règlement. Ils voulaient en connaître davantage sur la justification. Ils auraient aimé obtenir plus d'informations quant à l'explication de se doter de telles mesures. Ils ont exprimé le sentiment que ces propositions étaient précipitées et manquaient de préparation. Alors, for the consultation and public dialogue evening, the results were mixed. Most people's comments were more about not about the content, but not about the format. So the respondents were numerous in pointing out that they wanted to understand more about the justification, have more information regarding the explanation of why these measures were needed, and they expressed a feeling that these proposals were rushed and lacked preparation. Now the results, les résultats. Alors, les résultats que vous pouvez prendre connaissance dans le rapport qui est déposé sur le site Web, c'est pas juste une source d'information, c'est plusieurs sources. Donc, c'est l'analyse des résultats. C'est basé sur les commentaires exprimés lors de la soirée de consultation et de dialogue public, donc les tables rondes, les taux de satisfaction et d'insatisfaction aux questions du questionnaire, ainsi que sur les commentaires reçus lors des projets de règlement. So the results are not based just solely on one source of information, like the questionnaire, but on many other information. So it was the comments expressed during the public consultation and dialogue session, so the roundtables, the rates of satisfaction and dissatisfaction to the questionnaire questions, as well as the feedback received on the proposed regulation, so all of your comments. Alors, si on regardait les mesures qui étaient proposées, premièrement, il y avait certaines mesures qui touchaient la préservation des milieux humides et l'une d'elles était de limiter les interventions dans les milieux humides. 60% des répondants sont en faveur de cette proposition. Toutefois, certains expriment des préoccupations quant à la définition de ce que constitue un milieu humide. Ils aimeraient voir les bassins d'eau artificielle exclus et que la définition soit basée sur d'autres critères tels que la taille, la composition, la connectivité au milieu hydrique existant. Certains souhaitent qu'il n'y ait pas d'exemption pour les fins commerciales et d'autres s'inquiètent de l'interdiction des travaux lorsque des ruisseaux sujets aux inondations sont présents sur leur terrain. So one of the proposals was in regards, to the preservation of wetlands, and one was about to limit the types of intervention in wetlands. So 60% of respondents expressed support for this proposal. However, for many, they wanted more information about the definition of what constitutes a wetland, and they suggest that it should be revised to exclude artificial water basins, and that other criteria should be considered, such as the size, the composition, the connectivity to the water environment. For some, there should be no exemption for commercial purposes, and others are concerned about the prohibition of work when streams are present on a flood-prone land. The other measure was l'élargissement. L'autre mesure, était par rapport à l'élargissement de la rive à 15 mètres pour les lots vacants. Les résultats sont mitigés. Plusieurs espèrent ne pas être limités dans la possibilité de diriger une construction sur leur terrain, surtout sur les terrains de petite dimension. Et plusieurs souhaiteraient que les coûts, les frais juridiques, les effets de telles mesures sur les propriétés privées soient évalués avant l'adoption de ces mesures de préservation. So another measure regarding the preservation of wetlands was the widening the shore to 15 meters for all vacant lots. So the opinions are mixed. Many hope not to be limited in their ability to build on their land, particularly on small parcels of land. And several would like the cost, legal fees, and effects of such measures on private properties to be evaluated before the adoption of these preservation measures. Maintenant, concernant la protection des arbres et de la canopée, il y avait une proposition de modifier le diamètre d'un arbre à 5 cm, donc la définition pour pouvoir abattre un arbre. 80% des répondants rejettent cette proposition. Pour eux, la définition d'un arbre devrait exclure les espèces envahissantes, les arbres ornementaux, les grands arbustes, les arbres fruitiers, les arbres sujets aux maladies et les espèces non indigènes. Il y a des préoccupations quant à l'identification des espèces à 5 cm, l'effet sur l'ensoleillement et le jardinage, la proximité excessive entre les arbres entre eux, la proximité aux bâtiments existants et sur les coupes d'assainissement. Il y a également une forte préoccupation quant aux frais de gestion, d'administration et de suivi que cela occasionnerait. So for the protection of trees and of the canopy, there was a proposition to change the definition of a tree to be, for felling trees, that the diameter of the tree goes from 10 centimeters to 5 centimeters. So 80% of respondents reject this proposal. The definition should exclude invasive species, ornamental trees, large shrubs, fruit trees, trees prone to disease, and non-native species. There were concerns about the difficulty of identifying a tree species at 5 centimeters in diameters, the effect on sunlight and gardening, as well as the excessive proximity between trees, the existing buildings, as well as sanitation cuts, and strong concerns regarding management, administrative, and monitoring fees that this definition would occasion. Une autre mesure, c'était l'introduction d'une marge de non-déboisement. Alors, la majorité des répondants appuient l'introduction des marges de non-déboisement pour tout lot bordant une zone agricole, publique, récréative, de conservation ou une limite du territoire de la ville. Plusieurs estiment qu'elle devrait être étendue aux terrains destinés à un développement commercial et aux nouvelles constructions, surtout dans les zones où un plan d'aménagement d'ensemble serait requis. Et certains l'associent à une forme d'expropriation et souhaitent ne pas être contraints dans la jouissance de leur propriété. So another measure was the introduction of a non-deforestation setback. The majority of respondents support the introduction of a non-deforestation margins for any lots bordering agricultural, public, recreational, conservation zones, and municipal boundaries. Many feel it should be extended to land intended for commercial development and for new constructions, especially in areas where a comprehensive development plan would be required. Some associated with a form of expropriation and wish not to be constrained in the enjoyment of their property. Une autre mesure était la réduction du dégagement pour l'abattage des arbres autour d'une construction projetée. Alors, plus de 50% des répondants rejettent cette proposition. Nombreux sont ceux qui estiment que la marge de déboisement ne permet pas un dégagement suffisant pour éviter que les branches et les feuilles ne tombent sur leur maison, pour prévenir des dommages à leur fondation, qu'ils ne pourraient pas avoir un accès adéquat à ces endroits, par exemple pour de l'entretien d'un bâtiment. D'autres invoquent la diminution de l'ensoleillement, la réduction de l'utilisation de leur propriété et, encore une fois, certains associent cette mesure à une forme d'expropriation. So another measure was the reduction of the clearance for felling trees around a planned construction. More than 50% of respondents reject this proposal. Many feel that the deforestation margin does not allow sufficient clearance to prevent branches and leaves from falling on houses, to prevent damage to their foundations, that they wouldn't have adequate access to these areas. Others mention the decrease of sunlight, the reduction in the use of their property, and some associate these measures with expropriation. Maintenant, concernant la restriction de l'abattage d'arbres pour l'implantation de constructions accessoires, les résultats sont mitigés. Certains estiment qu'il serait préférable de limiter la déforestation liée au nouveau développement et préserver et améliorer les corridors biologiques et les boisements existants. Ils jugent que les normes de construction en vigueur sont satisfaisantes, de protection, pardon, non de construction en vigueur sont satisfaisantes, affirmant que la canopée ne pose aucun problème. So another measure in regard to restriction for tree felling for construction of accessory structures. Mixed support for this proposal. Some believes that it should be preferable to limit deforestation associated with new developments or to preserve and improve existing biological corridors and woodlands. They consider the current protection standards to be satisfactory, stating that the canopy is not a problem. Maintenant, la protection des arbres remarquables, plus de 60% des répondants sont favorables et reconnaissent leur contribution au caractère naturel et bucolique de la ville d'Hudson. Certains souhaiteraient une définition plus précise de ce qu'est un arbre remarquable basé sur des critères objectifs et d'autres rejettent le recours à des rapports d'experts avant d'obtenir un permis d'abattage. Plusieurs remettent en question la permission accordée aux terrains de golf de couper jusqu'à 10% des arbres annuellement, surtout lorsque ces terrains ont peu ou pas d'arbres remarquables répertoriés. Now, for the protection of remarkable trees, over 60% of respondents are in favor and recognize their contribution to the natural and bucolic character of the town of Hudson. Some would like a more precise definition of what constitutes a remarkable tree based on objective criteria, and others reject the use of expert reports before obtaining a tree felling permit. Many question the permission granted to golf courses to cut up to 10% of trees annually, especially when these courses have few or no remarkable trees listed. Maintenant, la contribution pour fin des parcs, terrains de jeu et milieux naturels, c'est vraiment l'enjeu central que vous avez soulevé lors de la consultation publique. Alors, plus de 65 des répondants rejettent la proposition d'élargir cette contribution à d'autres catégories. Les raisons de ce rejet incluent le manque de justification pour de telles mesures, l'absence d'explication sur pourquoi le niveau actuel de taxation n'est pas jugé satisfaisant, surtout dans un contexte de surplus financier, le manque de clarté sur le fonctionnement du processus de répartition des fonds et sur les critères de priorisation, ainsi que l'iniquité potentielle entre les propriétaires. Concernant la contribution pour les projets de redéveloppement, donc de rénovation entre autres, ils considèrent qu'elle serait discriminatoire et punitive, qu'elle affecterait la valeur d'une propriété ainsi que sa valeur de revente. Ils invoquent également que cette contribution n'est pas en lien avec l'objectif du règlement. Now, for the issue that mobilized the public consultation the most was the contribution for parks, playgrounds, and natural areas. So more than 65% rejected the proposal to expand the categories. Reason for this rejection include the lack of justification for such measures, the absence of explanation as to why the current level of taxation is not considered sufficient, especially in a context of financial surplus, the lack of clarity on how to fund allocation process works and on the prioritization criteria, as well as the potential inequities between property owners. Regarding the contribution for the redevelopment projects, which is the renovation, they considered it to be discriminatory and punitive, impacting the value of a property as well as its resale value. They also argue that this contribution is not related to the objective of the regulation. There will be a question period after the second presentation. Maintenant, remplacement par une taxe générale, les résultats sont mitigés, principalement en raison du manque de justification, encore une fois, et l'insuffisance des explications. Plusieurs sont en accord, par contre, avec l'imposition d'une taxe à taux fixe par résidence, mais seulement après l'adoption du plan directeur des parcs et du plan de conservation. Replacement by a general tax, mixed support mainly due to the lack of justification and insufficient explanation, but many agree with imposing a fixed rate tax per residence, but only after the adoption of the Parks Master Plan and the Conservation Plan. That was announced at the consultation. Lastly, les commentaires sur le projet de règlement 768-2024 qui est sur les plans d'aménagement d'ensemble. Alors, ça a été bien accueilli par les résidents. Les répondants espèrent que l'introduction de ces plans permettra de préserver le caractère boisé de ces terrains. Ils encouragent une approche plus ferme que celle de simplement encourager le développement tout en préservant une canopée arborée. Il y a eu des suggestions, par exemple, d'introduire une bande de protection entre les quartiers existants et les nouveaux développements, ainsi que l'inclusion de certains secteurs de la ville actuellement sujets à plusieurs projets de démolition et de construction tels que Alstonville et Como. So lastly, the comments on the draft bylaw regarding the introduction of comprehensive development plans was well received by residents. Respondents hope that the introduction of these plans will help preserve the wooded character of these lands. They encourage a firmer approach than simply encouraging development while preserving a tree canopy. There was also some suggestions. For example, introducing a protection strip between existing neighborhoods and new development, as well as the inclusion of certain areas of the town currently subject to several demolition and construction projects, such as Astonville and Como. So that's the end of my presentation.
Donc, je vais continuer avec la présentation des modifications au projet de règlement. So I'll continue with the presentation of the modifications to the draft bylaws. Juste commencer par une petite mise en contexte. Donc, en décembre 2021, le conseil municipal a débuté la modification de son plan d'urbanisme afin de prioriser la protection des milieux naturels. En même temps, le conseil municipal a adopté un contrôle intérimaire aussi appelé RCI depuis plusieurs mois, imposant un moratoire sur certaines opérations d'urbanisme. Le plan d'urbanisme, c'est le document le plus important de la ville en matière de planification de l'aménagement de son territoire. Les orientations qui s'y retrouvent guident la prise de décision en matière d'aménagement futur. Le plan d'urbanisme énonce également des stratégies afin d'atteindre ces orientations. Les règlements d'urbanisme, ils découlent de ce plan et doivent être modifiés pour mettre en œuvre ces stratégies. Une fois en vigueur, le contrôle intérimaire sera levé. Donc, c'est ces règlements modifiés qu'on travaille dessus là, depuis plusieurs mois et qu'on vous propose les modifications ce soir. So, in December 2021, the Town Council began the modification of its planning program to prioritize the protection of natural areas. At the same time, the Council adopted the Interim Control Measures, or RCI, imposing a moratorium on certain planning operations. The planning program is the most important document for the town in terms of planning the territory. It establishes the orientations which guide the planning of the town and the strategies to achieve these orientations. The urban planning bylaws stem from the urban planning program, and therefore they must be modified in order to implement these strategies. Once those modifications in effect, the interim control measure will be lifted. Je vais débuter par la présentation des principales modifications au projet 767-2024 et après ça, on va y aller avec le 768-2024. So I'll begin with the presentation of the major modifications to bylaw 767 and then I'll follow up with bylaw 768. Donc, au niveau des milieux humides et milieux hydriques, le pouvoir de réglementation des municipalités est restreint. La protection des milieux humides et hydriques est régie par le ministère de l'Environnement en vertu de la loi sur la qualité de l'environnement et de son règlement sur les activités dans les milieux humides, hydriques et sensibles. Les municipalités n'ont pas de carte blanche pour la gestion de ces milieux. C'est la raison pourquoi la définition que je vais vous présenter dans un instant de milieux humides et milieux hydriques n'a pas été modifiée, parce qu'elle se base sur celle qui est prévue à la loi. Pour la détermination de la présence d'un milieu humide ou hydrique, les façons de faire, la méthodologie et qu'est-ce que ça doit comprendre, c'est également établi là, par la réglementation provinciale. Donc, la définition des milieux humides et hydriques, c'est des lieux d'origine naturelle ou humaine qui se distinguent par une présence d'eau. Un milieu humide est également caractérisé par des sols saturés en eau ou une végétation ayant de préférence pour ces milieux. So the ability of towns to implement bylaws is limited. The protection of wetlands and bodies of water is governed by the Ministry of Environment under the Environment Quality Act. as well as the regulation respecting activities in wetlands, bodies of water, and sensitive areas. That's the reason why the definition for wetlands and for bodies of water was not changed. It's based on the one from the law. Several guides exist to determine the presence of a wetland and to indicate the methodology to follow to determine if the area is a wetland or a body of water or not. So the definition refers to a natural or a man-made site characterized by the presence of water. A wetland is also characterized by saturated soils or vegetation that prefer wetlands. Le projet de règlement proposait des interdictions dans les milieux humides. On proposait notamment l'interdiction d'ériger une construction, d'effectuer des travaux de remblai ou de déblai, de cueillir, de chasser ou de faire du piégeage dans un milieu humide, avec deux exceptions, dont la première étant pour des fins municipales, commerciales, publiques et d'accès public, avec une autorisation ministérielle ou un CA du ministère de l'Environnement. Et pour les autres fins, dont par exemple une fin résidentielle, si une autorisation ministérielle a été obtenue avant l'entrée en vigueur du règlement. Les modifications qui ont été apportées, c'est notamment l'allègement de certaines de ces interdictions afin de permettre sans restriction la cueillette, la chasse et le piégeage dans ces milieux. Et on a également retiré l'interdiction d'abattre les arbres dans ces milieux qui vont être assujettis aux conditions existantes au niveau de l'abattage des arbres. Le retrait de l'exception des travaux à des fins commerciales avec une autorisation ministérielle a été retiré. Et on a ajouté une nouvelle exemption pour les travaux qui sont autorisés sans autorisation ministérielle par la réglementation ministérielle provinciale. So the proposed bylaw added the prohibition or proposed the prohibition on construction, backfilling, and excavation works, as well as harvesting, hunting, or trapping in wetlands, with two exceptions. So the first one was for municipal, commercial, public, or public access purposes, with a ministerial authorization or a CA from the Ministry of the Environment. And the second exception was for any other purpose if a ministerial authorization was obtained before the regulation comes into force. The modifications made, so there was the reduction of the prohibitions in order to allow, without restriction, gathering or harvesting, hunting, and trapping in wetlands, as well as felling of trees in wetlands, which will now fall under the current conditions of the tree cutting regulations. There's also the withdrawal of permission to work in wetlands for commercial purposes with a ministerial authorization, and an exemption was added for work that is permitted by the provincial regulation without a ministerial authorization. Le projet de règlement proposait également l'élargissement de la largeur de la rive. Donc, la rive, c'est la bande de terrain qui borde les lacs, les cours d'eau et les milieux humides. Le projet de règlement proposait l'augmentation de cette bande riveraine ou de la rive à 15 mètres pour les lots vacants, et ça, peu importe la pente ou la hauteur du talus. Donc, je vous rappelle qu'en vertu de la réglementation provinciale actuelle, elle est de 10 ou de 15 mètres selon la pente et la hauteur du talus. Donc, pour les lots vacants, ils tomberaient tous à 15 mètres. Le projet de règlement prévoyait aucune modification pour les lots construits. Au niveau des modifications qui ont été apportées, donc la largeur de la rive augmentée à 15 mètres pour les lots vacants, elle est maintenue. Une mesure d'exception a été ajoutée lorsque l'élargissement de cette rive rend la construction d'un bâtiment principal impossible sur ce lot. Et on demeure avec aucune modification pour les lots construits. So the proposed bylaw proposed to increase the width of the shore. So the shore is the strip of land bordering lakes, watercourses, and wetlands. So for vacant lot, it was proposed that this width be increased to 15 meters regardless of the slope or the height of the embankment, and no modifications were proposed for already built lots. So according to the existing provincial regulations, the shore has to have a minimum of 10 or 15 meters depending on the height of the slope or of the percentage of the slope or the height of the embankment, And in the modifications that were made, it was maintained, the shoreline width of 50 meters for vacant lands was maintained, And an exception was added for the widening of the shore when it makes the construction of a main building impossible on the lot, and no modification is for built lots. Au niveau de l'abattage d'arbres, donc le projet de règlement proposait la réduction du diamètre d'un arbre pour lequel un permis d'abattage d'arbres serait requis de 10 à 5 cm. Et dans la modification apportée, donc cette modification a été retirée, donc le diamètre minimal pour l'exigence d'un permis d'abattage d'arbres restera à 10 cm. The proposed bylaw also proposed the reduction of the diameter of a tree for which a tree cutting permit is required from 10 to 5 centimeters. This proposition was withdrawn in the modifications made, so the minimum diameter for the requirement for a tree cutting permit remains at 10 centimeters. Le projet de règlement introduisait également une notion de marge de non-déboisement d'une largeur de 5 mètres applicable pour les lots bordant les zones agricoles, publiques, récréatives, de conservation, ainsi qu'aux limites du territoire de la ville. Aucune modification n'a été apportée à cette proposition, donc c'est maintenu tel quel. The proposed bylaw also introduced the non-deforestation setback of a width of 5 centimeters for lots bordering on agricultural, public, recreational conservation zones, as well as municipal boundaries. And this proposition was kept as is, so no modifications were made. Le projet de règlement prévoyait également la réduction du dégagement d'abattage d'arbres permis autour des constructions. Ça touchait notamment les constructions accessoires, donc surtout les piscines et les constructions accessoires. Donc, il était proposé d'un dégagement de 3 mètres pour les piscines et un dégagement de 1 mètre pour les constructions accessoires. Et le projet de règlement proposait également l'obligation d'installer une clôture temporaire autour des arbres qui vont rester, donc les arbres qui sont à protéger pendant les travaux. Dans les modifications apportées, donc, on a l'allègement du dégagement d'abattage permis autour des constructions. Ça serait de 4 mètres pour les piscines et de 2 mètres pour les bâtiments, les constructions accessoires, donc par exemple les cabanons. Et l'obligation d'installer une clôture temporaire autour des arbres à protéger est maintenue. The proposed bylaw proposed the reduction of the maximum clearance permitted for constructions. So it was proposed 3 meters around swimming pools and 1 meter for accessory constructions. And the bylaw also proposed the obligation to install a temporary fence around the trees to be protected. And the modifications made, the maximum clearance was modified to 4 meters for swimming pools and to 2 meters for accessory constructions. The obligation to install a temporary fence was maintained in the Le projet de règlement proposait également l'ajout de restrictions sur l'implantation des constructions accessoires. Donc, lorsqu'un espace sans arbre était disponible, celui-ci devra être privilégié pour l'implantation de la construction. Et s'il n'y en a pas, il faudra privilégier l'espace qui nécessite un abattage minimal. Cette proposition a été également retenue telle qu'elle. The proposed bylaw also added the restrictions on the siting of accessory constructions. So the space, when there's tree-free space on the property, that one has to be favored for the location of the accessory constructions. When there's none, the minimal amount of felling has to be, the space requiring the minimal amount of felling has to be favored. This proposal was maintained as is as well. Donc, dans le projet de règlement, on avait également préservé plusieurs articles qui provenaient du règlement qui sont en ce moment en vigueur, dont la possibilité pour les terrains de golf d'obtenir un permis d'abattage d'arbres sur présentation d'un rapport d'un ingénieur forestier, leur permettant d'abattre jusqu'à 10 % des arbres par année civile. Cette proposition, ou cette permission, en fait, a été retirée, ou... Oui, c'est ça. A été retirée, puis cette proposition était déjà unique au terrain de golf. So in the proposed bylaw, we had some regulations that are currently already in force and existing in the proposition. One of these was the possibility for golf courses to obtain, on presentation of a report from a forestry engineer, a tree cutting permit allowing them to fell up to 10% of trees per calendar year. This possibility or permission to golf courses was withdrawn from the proposed bylaw. Le projet de règlement ajoutait également la notion d'arbres remarquables. Donc, les arbres remarquables sont des arbres souvent anciens, imposants ou de grande taille qui ont été inventoriés en 2022 et qui sont listés là, dans le projet de règlement. Ces arbres ne pouvaient pas, en vertu du projet de règlement, être abattus pour des projets de construction, et un rapport d'experts démontrant que l'arbre est mort, en voie de mourir ou dangereux était requis pour obtenir un permis d'abattage d'arbres. Dans les modifications apportées, donc le maintien de cette interdiction, et on maintient également l'exigence du rapport d'experts. Toutefois, ce rapport d'experts sera maintenant produit aux frais de la Ville. The proposed bylaw added also the notion of remarkable trees. So remarkable trees are often old, imposing, or large trees. They were inventoried in 2022 and listed in the proposed bylaw. In the proposed bylaw, these trees could not be felled for construction projects, and an expert report showing that the tree is dead, dying, or dangerous was required to obtain a tree cutting permit. In the modifications made, so the prohibition was maintained, as well as the requirement for the expert report. However, that report will now be produced at the town's expense. Le projet de règlement proposait également une modification des montants des amendes pour les abattages d'arbres sans permis. Dans les modifications apportées, ces montants ont été révisés. Ils ont été révisés à la hausse afin de se conformer à la toute nouvelle exigence provinciale qui a été adoptée vers la mi-décembre 2023. The proposed bylaw also proposed the increase in the amounts of the fines applicable to tree cutting without a permit. These amounts were revisited upwards, so they're higher in order to comply with the new provincial requirement that was adopted in December 2023. La contribution pour fin de parc, terrain de jeu et espace naturel, je vais commencer par vous expliquer ce que c'est. Donc, c'est des contributions qui peuvent être exigées lors de l'application pour des permis de lotissement ou de construction. Ces contributions ne peuvent servir que pour l'acquisition, l'aménagement et l'entretien de parcs, de terrains de jeu et d'espaces naturels. Ils peuvent être sous forme de parties de terrain en argent ou une combinaison des deux. Toutefois, la contribution sous forme monétaire ne peut jamais excéder 10 %. Une prise en compte des contributions antérieures doivent être faites lorsqu'il s'agit du même site, et ça, peu importe qui était le propriétaire. Et actuellement, ces contributions sont applicables aux propriétaires fonciers qui subdivisent leur propriété. The contribution for parks, playgrounds, and natural spaces, it's a contribution that may be required when applying for subdivision or construction permits. They can only be used for the acquisition, development, and maintenance of parks, playgrounds, and natural spaces. They can be in the form of sections of land, money, or a combination of both. If the contribution is in monetary form, it can never exceed 10%. The contributions has to take into account previous contributions made in the past for the same site, regardless of who was the owner. And this is currently applicable to landowners who subdivide their properties in several lots. Donc, le projet de règlement ou la réglementation existante, en fait, contient déjà la contribution existante de 10 % pour la subdivision d'un lot. Celle-ci, elle est maintenue dans les modifications qui sont apportées. The existing bylaw already includes a contribution of 10% for the subdivision of a lot, and this contribution is maintained. Le projet de règlement proposait également une contribution de 10 % pour la construction de nouvelles maisons sur un lot vacant. Parmi les modifications apportées, donc, on a réduit la contribution à 2,5 % pour la construction d'une résidence unifamiliale sur un lot vacant. La contribution, elle est maintenue à 10 % pour la construction d'un bâtiment bifamilial ou multifamilial, donc plus que 2 logements, sur un lot vacant. The proposed bylaw proposed the contribution of 10% for the construction of a new house on a vacant lot. In the modifications made, this contribution was lowered to 2.5% for the construction of a single-family dwelling. The contribution was maintained at 10% for the construction of a two-family or a multifamily building. In Hudson, a multifamily starts at 3 units per building. Le projet de règlement proposait également une contribution de 10% pour la démolition et la reconstruction d'une maison. Il y avait une mesure d'exception dans le cas de sinistre dans lequel aucune contribution ne serait exigée. Dans les modifications apportées, la contribution a été retirée dans le cas d'une démolition, d'une reconstruction d'une résidence unifamiliale à l'intérieur d'une période de 24 mois. L'exception de la contribution dans le cas d'un sinistre a été maintenue et la contribution est de 10% dans le cas d'une démolition et de construction d'un bâtiment bifamilial ou multifamilial. The proposed bylaw proposed the contribution of 10% for demolition and subsequent construction of a house. An exemption was existing in the event of a disaster where no contribution would be required. In the modifications made, no contribution is applied for the demolition and subsequent construction within a 24-month period for single-family dwellings. The exemption of the contribution in the case of a disaster was maintained, and the contribution is of 10% for the demolition and subsequent construction of a two-family or a multifamily building. Le projet de règlement proposait également la contribution de 10% pour la rénovation de plus de 33% du volume d'une construction existante. Cette contribution a été retirée dans les modifications apportées. The proposed bylaw also added or proposed a contribution of 10% for the renovation of more than 33% of the volume of an existing construction. This contribution was withdrawn in the modifications that were made. Le projet de règlement imposait également une contribution de 10% pour l'ajout de 2 logements ou plus dans un bâtiment existant. Cette proposition est maintenue telle qu'elle. The proposed bylaw also added a contribution of 10% for the addition of 2 or more units in an existing building. This proposition was maintained. Le projet de règlement ajoutait une contribution de 10% pour l'agrandissement d'un bâtiment commercial de plus de 25% de sa superficie de plancher originale. Cette contribution a également été retirée. So in the proposed bylaw, there was a contribution of 10% for the addition to commercial building of more than 25% of its original floor area. This contribution was also withdrawn. Et finalement, on avait une contribution de 10% pour le changement d'un usage d'un bâtiment existant. Cette contribution qui a également été retirée. And there was a contribution of 10% for the change of use in an existing building, which was also withdrawn. Par la suite, au niveau des contributions, ceux-ci pouvaient aller jusqu'à 20% dans le cas des secteurs centraux. Le secteur central dans le projet de règlement était défini comme le périmètre urbain. Dans les modifications qui ont été apportées, le secteur central a été réduit pour inclure seulement les zones avec un potentiel de nouvel développement à plus forte densité. In the proposed bylaw, there was a contribution of 20% for the central sector, and the central sector was defined as the urban perimeter. In the modifications made, the central sector was redefined in order to include only the areas with potential for new residential developments at higher density. Donc, je ne suis pas sûre qu'on le voit, mais je vous montre ici une carte des secteurs centraux. Donc, je vais vous les expliquer légèrement. Ouais, merci. Donc, on a le premier secteur ici, qui est délimité là, par c'est le boisé et les milieux naturels là, délimités par Côte-Saint-Charles, Charleswood, Oakland et la rue Ridge. On a également les deux lots ou les deux secteurs qui font partie du projet de Pine Beach, donc de l'autre côté du chemin de fer et le long de la rue Beach. Parmi les secteurs, on a également le boisé sur Main en face de la rue Somerset là, qui se retrouve entre Mont-Plaisant et Quarry Point. On retrouve le milieu humide de Comer Gardens ainsi que le boisé et le milieu humide entre le centre palliatif et le secteur Kilteven. Et en dernier lieu, on retrouve le secteur Willowbrook. Je vais donc enchaîner avec la présentation des modifications au projet de règlement 768 sur les PAE. I'll continue with the presentation of the modifications to draft bylaw 768 on comprehensive development plans. Donc, au niveau des PAE, les PAE, c'est un outil réglementaire qui guide le développement. Il vise l'organisation de manière cohérente et harmonieuse des projets de développement. Pour ce faire, le règlement sur les PAE établit la vision de la ville au travers de critères et d'objectifs d'aménagement. Pour ceux qui sont familiers avec l'outil du PIA, le plan d'implantation et d'intégration architecturale, ça se ressemble, c'est des éléments, c'est des règlements à caractère discrétionnaire. Et c'est la raison pourquoi on établit là, la vision à travers de critères et des objectifs d'aménagement. Dans ces développements, ce n'est pas nécessairement le règlement de zonage qui régit l'aménagement, mais plutôt le projet proposé qui générera une nouvelle réglementation qui, elle, sera assujettie aux consultations publiques. Seules les zones qui sont inscrites au règlement sur les PAE font l'objet d'une telle planification. Ceux-ci concernent notamment les secteurs centraux que je viens de vous présenter. So what is a CDP or a comprehensive development plan? A comprehensive development plan is a regulatory tool that guides development. It aims to organize development projects in a coherent and harmonious manner. To do this, the CDP bylaw establishes the vision of the town through criteria and development objectives. So for those who know the SPAPE bylaw, the Site Planning and Integration an architectural integration program, it's a bylaw where, which establishes criteria and objectives which have to be met and are, which the evaluation goes through a discretionary evaluation. In those cases, it's not necessarily the zoning bylaw which governs the development, but rather the proposed project which generates a new regulations which will be subject to public consultation. And only the areas listed in the CDP bylaw are subject to such planning. These are mainly the sectors I presented to you as the central sectors. Au niveau des modifications au règlement sur les PAE, donc peu de modifications ont été apportées au règlement sur les PAE. Parmi les modifications, on retrouve, c'est surtout des modifications mineures. Là, on en a au niveau de la liste des informations à fournir lors d'une demande de PAE. Par exemple, on ajoute d'exiger le nombre d'espaces de stationnement, les superficies d'espaces perméables et imperméables et les superficies d'espaces verts. On a également ajouté un critère visant à limiter leur remblai. So in terms of the modifications to the CDP bylaw, not a lot of modifications were made. There were mostly minor modifications. So for example, we have modifications to the list of information required when applying for the CDP in order to add the number of parking spaces, the surface areas for permeable and impermeable spaces, and the surface areas of green spaces. We also added the criteria to limit backfilling. Au niveau de l'échéancier et des prochaines étapes, so now for the timeline and the next steps. Donc, dans l'échéancier, on avait beaucoup d'étapes qui ont déjà été effectuées. Donc, on avait la modification du plan d'urbanisme en décembre 2021, ainsi que l'adoption du contrôle intérimaire. Ça s'est suivi par l'adoption des projets de règlement en janvier et d'une consultation publique là, qui a débuté avec les portes ouvertes le 25 janvier et qui s'est terminée là, avec la période de la consultation écrite le 14 février. Ce soir, on tient cette séance d'information et l'adoption des règlements finaux est prévue le 6 mai 2024 à la prochaine séance du Conseil. L'entrée en vigueur de ces règlements se fera lorsque la municipalité régionale de comté, la MRC de Vaudreuil-Soulanges, aura émis le certificat de conformité. Celle-ci a 120 jours pour émettre son certificat. Donc, on espère une entrée en vigueur là, au courant de fin de l'été, début de l'automne 2024. So for the timeline, we had the modifications to the to the planning program and the adoption of the interim control measures in December of 2021. The draft bylaws were adopted or deposited at the Town Council on January 10th of this year. A public consultation period was held from January 25th, starting with the opening houses and finishing on February 14th with the end of the written consultation period. Today, we're holding this information session, and the adoption of the final bylaws is scheduled for May 6th at the next Town Council meeting. For those bylaws to come into force, we have to get the conformity certificate from the regional county municipality or the municipalité régionale comté of Vaudreuil-Soulanges. They have 120 days to furnish this the certificate, so we hope to enter into to come into force somewhere at the end of the summer, beginning of fall 2024. Donc, c'était tout au niveau de la présentation, au niveau de la période de questions.
Donc, thank you so much. I would like to thank you as well for your patience as we ran through the 91 slides of this presentation that covered not only the public consultation process, but also the 2 bylaws. Of course, it's 5 bylaws that we are looking to modify. I have here a list of all the, essentially the items that have been reviewed in this process, and they account for approximately 20 items. The reason the approximately is the 20th is to itself that last bylaw on the comprehensive development plan. So it's pretty exhaustive. I think that there's been a lot of work done, and thank you again for your generous comments. So I'd also like to commend Melissa Francis and the technical team for the quality of their exhaustive work and the preparation of the material, the decisional tools, but also the exchange opportunities that they gave council, and also the comparative studies. They gave us some tables where it was very much where did we start from, what is in the essential provincial law, where were the benefits, and what are the different options. So it's really quite exhaustive. I have these working documents here if you would like to take a look later. They're obviously working documents. We will not be sharing them online as they were really in for the process. Also, as you've noted, probably the most significant changes were done with regards to the contributions. So one of the comments that came out was, what was the intent? Where did that come from? I think it's important to go back to the CIMA Plus, the 2017 conservation plan, but also Echo to Herbs 2021 report. Both made reference to different tools that are available to us with regards to how do we start to implement protection measures. So they call this the Green Fund. It is a tool that they suggested, and this is where we were headed. So we took away from this process that it is a valuable and necessary for us to refresh the conservation plan, but also to prioritize the actions and to bring you aboard on into all of this and re-explain what the original intentions with the consultation plans were. So you'll find that this will be starting soon this year, and once we have better adhesion and better understanding from the population, it is a possibility that the population will ask that we go back to increasing, again, the tools that are available in the law, which is to increase contributions for density. Also, with regards to the contributions, I think you've seen that we took in your comments with regards to fairness and looking to transfer the burden away from existing families who are looking to improve their built assets and to transfer that burden towards new development. So we have absolutely listened to you, and I think I'm very glad that we've had this process and this opportunity. With regards to the last and final bylaws, so the one on the CDP, so we received some really interesting comments with regards to that, but again, this is really on how to better frame development in sensitive natural areas, so this will be much more about what we know as in terms of des écoquartiers or ecological neighborhoods, and obviously there will be room for improvement and additional criteria to add through time to that bylaw as we learn to work with it and improve. So if there are any questions, I propose that any questions that are of political nature will be answered by me. Any technical questions will be answered by Melissa and Martin, and any questions with regards to the consultation report would be answered by Marie-Hélène, if that is agreeable to you.
Yes, of course.
Yeah, all right. So we open the floor, and as with council meetings, est-ce qu'on a donné la parole, le droit de parole en ligne? Il est possible. So we'll go back and forth between people online. How many people are online? 17 people are online, and so I propose that you line up at the microphone and we'll alternate from one to the other. So yes. Good evening.
Good evening. Thank you so much for the presentation this evening. Just a couple of very quick questions. Can I ask if the golf courses themselves had actually asked for permission to cut 10% of the trees on their property on an annual basis?
So that is a technical question. I'm going to
So the provision was existing in the previous bylaws, and yes, they have applied for these types of permits in the past.
Okay, thank you. With regards to fines, penalties for cutting trees without a permit, are we allowed to increase the amount of punitive damages that we would want to ask? Perhaps not for the homeowner, but for a professional entity who would prefer to pay a fine than actually pay for a permit?
So they are regulated by the provincial law, and they are, yes. So they have been increased substantially already. They hadn't been increased since 2004. So in 2004, the provincial regulations set up the fees. So there's a minimum and maximum, we have to say, within these parameters that the law gives us.
Okay, so we do have to remain within certain parameters.
Yes.
Great, thank you for that.
Is there a question online? No.
No.
Thank you. Conrad Tappert.
Are you a Hudson resident?
Put it a little bit higher. Perfect.
Are you a Hudson resident?
I am a Hudson resident. Yeah. Yeah, I'm on Brisbane. So a couple of comments first. I want to commend council and everybody that worked on sort of establishing an urban plan to protect our national environment. Thank you. That's wonderful. I also want to commend council to realize, I mean, unfortunately in hindsight, but to realize that they probably never should have connected two very different programs, one protecting our natural environment and a second one a park tax. And so thank you for having that in your comments, Chloe, that they really shouldn't have come in one package. I have a couple of questions, starting with perhaps some observations on your decision-making methodology, and then perhaps you can answer the questions that are related to that. One, was probably a little bit more for Marie-Hélène in terms of, I believe the report had a lot of commentary around mixed results. So in general, mixed for most people means 50-50. So I found it a little bit wrong in many cases to use the term mixed in your commentaries when it was really like a 35% favorable and sort of or somewhat favorable. That means the majority was unfavorable. So I found a kind of mixed consistency in your decision making based on the results of the 800 plus respondents. The other comment I'd like to make is because I did find some very concrete decision making or changes that you did if the favorable or somewhat favorable was in the 20-something% range. And then I found you to go in a different direction if the favorable and somewhat favorable was in the 30% range. In my impression, both are unfavorable, whether it's 20-something% or 30%. So I guess the first question is if you could maybe advise us on how large, what was the percentage where that triggered, we better look at this and make a decision, because I found a lot of inconsistencies.
Right, so we weren't really working with the percentages. It gave us a sense of where is there support, where is there confusion, maybe the message was mixed. It is important that we sort that out. But also, what is the overall picture, and that's what I explained at the end, which was much more, we had understood that there was an ask to really shift that burden over more to new construction or density or the developers rather than on existing construction. So that's sort of the filter that we used in that sense once we sort of understand that that was the genius, if you want, to a lot of those comments. So after that, there were some instances, for example, we knew that contributions was going to be something that we had to work really hard since it was 65%, were against the proposal of expanding categories. For example, we understood that there was confusion against there, and we had to do a lot more changes there. So I think you'll see that there's quite a few elements that were removed, and that perhaps if we're able to rebuild or build some sort of support for that, that may come back in a different format in a next step.
So the surveys helped,
Yeah, absolutely.
but weren't part necessarily of decision-making. I found, and I'll give you an example of two where the surveys listed somewhat unfavorable in the 60-plus range.
So which
one
were
of
the
which
two?
you made a decision to remove, and one of which you made a decision not to remove. So there, I would like to understand.
And which were those? Could you?
Yeah, so as an example on construction of single-family residences, I would like to understand your reasoning how if someone has a lot for a single-family residence and is starting from scratch, they are going to be charged a tax of 2.5%. However, if someone buys a lot, but there's a house on it, demolish it, they will not be charged a tax. So it's a big, and they were both in the 60% range of unfavorable. They had the same unfavorable, but beyond the survey, I'm trying to understand your logic on if you buy a lot and you tear down, you can get away with no tax, but if you buy a lot and you don't tear down, you have to pay a tax.
So there was already a house on the lot where there's a tear down and a rebuild? It's all right.
He reminds me that it's a contribution, not a tax.
It's still money out of pocket, so it can be seen as it is, but thank you for the clarification. It is a financial contribution. But anyway, it went from, as I explained earlier, more on looking to encourage people to renovate and improve their built environment, their homes, and that the contributions would be requested as permitted in the law as a new source of revenue for environmental protection, but more on new constructions, which becomes added doors to our network and added doors to environment. As well, you're correct.
Specifically on those two, because that was a relatively general answer to the question, specifically on construction of a single-family home on a vacant lot, being charged a tax, but the next lot over that has a house on it that you're going to demolish and build that same home.
Correct.
Doesn't have a tax. So specifically on that example, could I have what was discussed in the room you know, in terms of a decision-making process, please?
I think I just gave you that answer, which is really the focus was that new construction was considered an addition, whereas replacing existing existing construction was not adding doors. So that's really where that went from.
Okay. Although the new construction will have a better tax base. Okay. In that specific case, you have two terminologies on page 48 and on page 53 of your report. So and I just want to make sure it's clarified.
This is the consultation report?
On the, yes.
So it's my report.
For construction on a single-family resident on a vacant lot, you've gone from 10 to 2.5%. On page 48, it's very clear that the intention of council was to only do that 2.5% if a resident was subdividing and then building a house on one of the lots. And in fact, you put that up tonight as one of the conditions. But then on page 53, it just says on a vacant lot.
Yeah, I don't have the pages with me. Je sais pas si toi tu les as. Is this on the consultation?
It was on your presentation tonight.
Okay, it's not the consultation report. I think it was.
Ça va être dans les diapositives.
Yeah, you can see on your presentation tonight on the so probably no, keep going backwards.
Où est-ce que tu as le 2.5? Ouais.
Yeah, so not that one. So now go back, and I'm sorry for taking a little bit of time here, but I thought you'd have those pages in front of you, so I didn't bring it. You'll have to go to your page. So the conflict is, I'll just describe, you've got 2 pages in your document. Page 48.
I'm not quite sure which document you're referring to. Where do you refer of the proposed bylaw that was...
It's the one that you sent.
Is it this table? If not, it's the proposed bylaw from the January version.
No, if you had it on one of your slides today, so sorry.
It must be the consultation. And what is 48 here? You must have
So
the wrong
before that
page
2.5%, but after the trees and once you're into this park tax. So there, sorry, go back. So see, currently applicable to landowners who subdivide their property into several lots. So you had 1 page, and this was specific to building on a single family lot. You had 1 page, 48, that was crystal clear that the council's intentions was that the fee only be imposed should a subdivision occur. Yet on page 53, you say
But we don't
simply
know
indicates a
which
vacant lot.
document you're referring to, and that's what we're trying
Yeah, no,
to
that's
follow.
okay. It's something to look into.
Ce que je propose, Madame la mairesse, c'est qu'on prenne la question après la période puis qu'on tente de répondre.
C'est bon.
On va prendre le temps avec vous, il n'y a pas de problème, parce que là, il semble qu'on a des... On ne se rejoint pas sur la page, mais on va se rejoindre tout à l'heure. Vous viendrez nous voir.
Because
On va
in none
regarder
of
ça
our
avec vous.
pages do we have the 48 and 53. So.
Okay, so you've got a conflict on 2 pages. We'll take that one away, and perhaps you can get back to us on the conflict on those 2 pages. One says it only occurs on subdivision. The other one says it just occurs on a vacant lot. Perfect. Great.
Merci, Martin.
The last question I have for you is, what would be the estimated revenues that you are using for this new park tax? So what do you believe the estimated revenues are for the town of Hudson? Obviously it's on a multi-year because it's on a forever basis.
Non, je sais.
I mean, you must have it because you're planning park
Well, so
park expenditures.
We had some estimates, but this is from before the changes that were made. So obviously these would have to be recalculated, but before the changes were made, based on 193 permit requests done between 2021 and 2023, the most part of the contributions would have been on new constructions, and I believe that we've kept that amount, the 10%. on those. And the reason we had that many permit requests on that was really for the new project of Willowbrook, right? So that is an unusual sort of one-time situation. It wouldn't be a recurrent situation where we would have, in that case, there were 26 new constructions, and the new constructions represented 50 of the 80 permit requests and had a value of $990,000. However, we've made changes to that so that would have to be recalibrated to figure out which would still be applicable. With regards to renovations, there were 5 permits that would have applied out of the 112 that had been requested, and that represented $156,000. We've removed that requirement, so that is not a revenue that we would be looking at. And in terms of transformation, the 2 permit requests out of the 2 that were applicable would have applied, but again, we have removed that contribution, and that was for a revenue of $27,000. So of the original $1.2 million that would have been, we expect that, I would say this has probably dropped to around a third of what that would have been.
Okay, so
if I can just add as well, if there's already a 10% contribution that was made, the construction on the building permit for the construction of a new single-family dwelling, the 2.5% will not apply because we take the previous contribution into account. So, for example, in the Willowbrook development, the town had taken at the time of the subdivision and 10% in a lot. So they took
a physical park.
A physical park. So these would not have been subject to the 2.5. So it depends on where the construction would be.
In a big picture scenario, it was 1.2. You believe, based on all the reductions from 10 to 0 and 10 to 2.5, that it'll be about 400,000.
And so, again, that's based on
let's use 400,000. So because it's important to
over
put these
over 3 years, right?
Well, and maybe more years, right? So it's not a large number. And because you have to put all what you're putting your town through and all your decision making in the context of what it's actually going to raise.
Correct.
So it's about 400,000 over multiple years. So it's 100,000 a year max. So it's not a large number. Perfect. So that helps with the context of doing the right thing, I guess, and doing what the majority of the 800 residents that asked for in the survey presented, right? Because we're not talking about a large number. So I just wanted to make sure the context, because that is very important. So you have about 100,000 a year. What next question is?
I feel a setup coming up, but let's go.
It is. It is a setup. But it's not. It's a very polite setup. So I'm a concerned citizen, and I've seen our legal expenses go up, and obviously this will bring some legal
challenges.
Yes. Thank you. It'll bring some legal challenges. So if we have 100,000 a year coming in, what are the provisions we've taken in our books for legal challenges and the costs of legal challenges, just to make sure we have an actual net?
So this money wouldn't go towards legal challenges, right? At this time...
No, legal challenges related to these new bylaws.
Correct. But we've had those situations before the RCI came on. It's true that there are new, I'm thinking of 2 perhaps, that have come on since the RCI has been in place, but those do not total up to $100,000 a year. Right. Okay. So provisions, yes, in our budget, every year we put aside a certain amount for legal support, but also, as you said, for legal defense.
Right. I would like to indicate probably a lot of those legal are very individualistic. When you have a cause that is of this size, and then I'll close on that. When you have a cause that is of this size, where the public sentiment is mainly unfavorable, I would just like to suggest that there may be more legal ramifications than you have as usual, and make sure, because we're talking about putting something in place that's not raising a lot of money.
It's generally the promoters that will come after the town with legal. I think that we've been, conciliatory in working with the population. I don't think that that's where the most of the stress or the strain will come from. And we'd have received an awful lot of requests and pressure to continue to protect the environment. So
This is not a protecting of the environment. This is strictly speaking about the park.
we have to be able to, in order to preserve is one thing, but if we really want to conserve spaces, we have to purchase them. That is where we're headed.
It is absolutely discriminatory, the decision-making that you're making, picking some to pay for a park tax and not others. And it is somewhat too mainly unfavorable in general in your community. And therefore, I believe there will be large, even from individuals, legal challenges.
All right. Thank you.
And I apologize for the time taken.
Est-ce qu'il y a une question en ligne?
Yes.
So we'll take the question online.
Roland Schulz.
Hello, Mr. Schultz.
Hi there. I had a couple of questions for you. One is with the intervention in wetlands. It says reduction and prohibitions without restrictions to allow harvesting, hunting, and trapping. Explanation, please. Does this mean that someone can hunt and trap on his land if he wants?
Yes.
So one can go hunting on Pine Lake, for example, and trapping and as they wish in a residential area.
Well, to go hunting on the private property, you need the private property's owner's consent. So you would not be able, unless you are owning Pine Lake, to hunt on Pine Lake.
So if I have a piece of land that's 70,000 square feet and I have beavers on them, I'm allowed to hunt the beavers, is that it?
So, yes, you will need the appropriate permits from the government, but in terms of from the town, yes, you would be able to.
Mm-hmm. Okay. The other thing is the park contribution. It says construction of new houses and vacant lots. You're talking about 2.5% on the construction of a single family residence. You're also talking about 10% of other cases. Further down, park contribution to demolition, you're talking 10% of what? 10% of park contribution. Is that the value of the land, the value of the construction? Is it 10% of what and 2% of what?
So in terms of the park's contribution, it is always the value of the land that's being used.
So if a new development goes up, it's just a 10% of the value of the land that is included and not the overall project. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Okay. And yep, that's all the questions I had. Yeah, I'm just concerned about the hunting on people's lands, so thank you.
Please come to the microphone.
Hey, good evening, everybody. I wanted to say first that I'm amazed at the engagement of Hudson residents. It's always blown me away that you guys get involved when there's something at stake and you feel that your interests have to be represented. I just wanted to thank you all for being so involved in this process. You guys, well, that's what you do. That's what you're delegated and mandated to do. So I expect that from you. There's some lack of clarity on one thing. The revisions to 767 redefine Hudson's central sector to include only areas for potential for new residential development at higher density. Madame Francis seemed to suggest it is the same properties, generally speaking, that are outlined in 768. Sandy Beach, R55, R70, Willowbrook, but there was also one, Como Gardens. Are there others that are on that list that are going to be specified, singled out?
In the central sectors, you mean?
Well, what's this new central sector? It's not the urban perimeter, because that's
no. So in the proposed
definition.
bylaw, the central sector was defined as the urban perimeter, and now they have been redefined to include only those zones you mentioned. So R55, Pine Beach, R70, and we have 2 lots in R15, which are Como Bog, and on the other side of the road, so between the palliative care and behind Kilteven.
So we need another map that'll tell us, because the urban perimeter map is clearly not a good definition of what you're trying to do here.
The map that was next was in appendix of the proposed bylaw 767 has been changed to the one I presented.
Okay, but I couldn't understand. I can't read that map. It was just one great brownish gray blob, right? So we'll get a better definition of what is actually being
so a new map will
referred
be
to.
in the final version of the bylaws, of the bylaw 767.
Okay, that really leads me to my other question. When do we get the final version? Because you're going to be adopting this May 6th. And so are we going to be able to get a wording, like for instance, you're going to do a notice of motion and the adoption all in one night, because that's usually how it's
So
done.
the notice of motion and le dépôt du projet was done on January 10th. So this will be the adoption of the final
But these
bylaw.
are revised. These are revised. So that, as I understand the LAU and the Cities and Towns Act, you would have had to withdraw the original ones.
No, you're allowed to
present
do
a revised
revisions
one. No?
following a public consultation.
Okay. So when are we going to, again, when will we get the text of the actual revised bylaws?
So usually the bylaws are submitted or are on the website with the agenda, which is usually published the Friday before the council meeting. So should be May 3rd, Friday, May 3rd.
And so we will actually be able to see the proposed bylaws on Friday the 3rd?
Correct. Yes.
Okay, but there's no further consultation, no further discussion. That's it. We're done, right? No further discussion necessary because you're going to go ahead and adopt these. Is that correct?
At this point, that is the plan.
Okay, good. Thanks.
Are there any questions online?
No.
No?
Oui.
Please go ahead.
Chantal Perrault, 12 rue Stonecrest à Hudson. Premièrement, j'aimerais exprimer, I would like to express my disappointment on the curtailing of pick and choose what we keep, what we leave out, because there was an overwhelming dissatisfaction about the whole concept of contribution for parks. And since that is the message you should have kept, and you should have put aside all the contribution you're trying to keep, 2.5% there and 10%. You know, we are paying taxes, all the residents, and it's a matter of equity, a matter of justice, that all the residents of Hudson are already paying taxes that are supposed to go for maintaining our parks, improving our parks and trails and all that. So the whole concept to create a contribution for me is, as we have not heard a good justification for that, and to maintain just some people like a single house, family housing or B housing or multi-family housing. Again, it is contrary to the equity that all the residents of Hudson are benefiting from parks and trails and all that. So I implore you to revise, since it's the last chance that we have to talk, and by transparency, I think we should have had for tonight the revised bylaws. We should have something more specific in our hands to see the real text that you want to adopt. But I think it is, I'm really, really disappointed that you are trying to keep targeting some, homeowners that will buy land to buy a family house in Hudson. It's totally unfair. They will, and especially since we know, at this point that there's totally no urgency to get more money for parks because we're like flowing in money with surplus accumulated and not used, and same for 2023. So I implore, you know, that's the only time we can do it. I implore to have a logic and a sense of equity and justice, so everybody's treated the same in Hudson. And for me, I feel really bad to be in Hudsonite with that kind of approach and mentality. So I don't adhere to that, and I'm really sad that you still keep a contribution for that, because it has not been justified as to the need, nor as to the who should pay. So for me, it's a total, I don't feel that we have been heard. I just don't feel that, and it was overwhelming, the participation in the public consultation, in the survey, and it's like maybe you want to make sure that those that talks the loudest are you know, put quiet with the fact that you have took out some, but you know, for me, even if one injustice is one too many. So. That's my first comment. My second question, two questions.
May I answer to your comment?
My question is...
Chantal, may I answer to your comment? May I answer to your comment?
Yes, you're welcome to answer.
So as I explained, we also received a lot of comments that asked us to shift the contribution burden onto new development and also on multi-units and larger development projects. So to cancel out all contributions would have voided that potential. And for us, that is an important part that needs to be taken into consideration. So we did listen in terms of the burden on individual family owners and shifted it to multi-units and larger developments.
Well, I'm sorry. I think you have listened to what you want to.
And that is your opinion.
But I don't think you listened to really what was said in a vast majority from Hudsonites, that we want justice and fair,
and that is
fair
your
treatment, fair and equal treatment. Okay, so my question also, you talk about the fine for the trees, and you just gave that you have put them higher without giving any specifics. And so can we know the minimum and the maximum that will be in the bylaw that you intend to adopt?
So the fines, there's different ways of calculating them. So the base fine is of $2,500, to which is added an amount per tree cut illegally that goes between $500 and $1,000, up to a maximum of $15,000. And this is in the case of where the trees cut is less of a hectare. In the case of more of 1 hectare, so it's still the base fine of $2,500. And then per hectares, it goes between $15,000 and $100,000 per hectare. So these are the fines that are that have been changed in the La loi sur l'aménagement et l'urbanisme, so the act
respecting land use,
and urban planning, and as well as the amounts are doubled in the case of second or subsequent.
Dans les faits, c'est un minimum qu'on peut charger aux clients parce que c'est été adopté à Québec. Fait que tous les municipalités sont obligées d'appliquer le règlement minimum. C'est celui-là. Il est déjà même plus élevé que ce qu'on avait proposé. Je pense à la première rencontre, c'était plus bas.
C'est juste que je n'avais pas les chiffres, alors merci de me donner.
C'est même ce qu'on avait proposé en première instance, c'était plus bas que ceux qui ont été décidés par Québec, juste pour votre information.
Okay. L'autre question, c'est, j'essaie de comprendre, avez-vous une base scientifique, scientific basis, to have put the 15 meters instead of 10 that was previously. Is there a scientific basis that commend this increase?
So there are, I mean, that's more on the technical side, but through many discussions with the Conservation Working Group, where there's a lot of PhDs, or used to be a lot of, because the group has been disbanded, but going, and I'm looking at Mark to make sure that he'll nod at me, but with regards to wetlands, I think it's up to 30 meters is actually the standard that they look for, and for forests, it's 60 meters. So when we started looking at what that meant, we just went, we can't do it, we're too much in an urban area, but we can start to increase and sensitize people to the value of these areas and look at mitigation, the bans. So it is a yes. We can probably find those scientific data points, Mark's nodding, and send those to you, or even bring them up at our next council meeting as well, if you'd like.
Okay, so there's a scientific opinion in writing. That
oh
you
yeah,
have
this is
in your
research.
For that, for justifying that.
There is research.
Is it available? Is it?
That's what I just said. I will give you, we will find those sources, and I will bring them, either send them to you or even bring them up at the next council meeting.
Okay. And finally, okay.
Thank you. Est-ce qu'il y a des questions en ligne? No, no questions. Please come to the mic.
Hi.
Hi.
Katie Shar, 88 Birchill. So I see, well, in the initial proposed bylaw, there was a contribution of 10% for the addition of 2 or more units. Sorry, no. So initially, there was a contribution for adding more than 25% of original floor area to a commercial building. So that was taken away.
Correct.
The modifications. However, if you look at the slide prior to it, the modification that was kept was a contribution of 10% for the addition of 2 or more units in an existing building. So in any multi-unit building, you're always going to have changes. In the last 6 months, go ahead.
We're talking here about the addition of residential units, and I see it was not on the slide and it was not on the table, but in the modifications
so
made,
you're not talking about commercial?
No, it's residential units.
Because I was going to say,
added.
like, they change constantly. You're getting bigger spaces divided up. It happens on a regular basis. So that will be made clear before the final adoption.
I'll say it in French, and then we'll try to translate. Vraiment, le but derrière ça, c'était d'aller chercher des contributions où ce qu'on ajoutait de la densité. Donc, la division d'un logement commercial n'apportait pas, en fait, tout le commerce n'apporte pas vraiment une densité. Donc, c'était ça le raisonnement là, de l'ajout de 2 logements ou plus.
Okay, so it will be made clear before the final adoption that it's not commercial spaces.
Yes.
Okay, so going back to that point, if you have a commercial building or a mixed-use building that has both commercial and residential, if you're adding a couple of spaces, despite the size, the existing volume of the existing building, like that doesn't come into play. So like, for instance, our building on the corner of Cameron and Main, you could easily add 2 residential apartments without affecting really any major volume, like adding a second story or something like that to make more affordable housing in the center of town. So that would trigger this tax or compensation.
Yes.
So what is the goal in that circumstance? Like, how do you think that that's beneficial?
Those are income properties versus residential primary housing.
But income properties are always going to be, I mean, other than a co-op, you're never going to have residential apartments that are not coming from an income property.
The distinction was, again, if it's for profit, then there should be a cost associated. If it is for essential living purposes, then there should be no cost associated.
Sorry, I didn't hear you exactly.
If it's for income purposes,
Yeah.
so development in adding units, usually for income, then that is something where there would be a contribution added.
Okay, are you not worried about the end result, though, that with that added contribution, it will be added rent to those tenants further down the line?
in the initial cost, there's always rolling in that cost of even purchase or rent, of course. But I think there's also other costs associated. In our sense, with people doing additional investments or income, there is also the burden on the town to be providing increased green spaces and recreational services as well. So that's where we're trying to find that balance, where someone who's making money developing their property, the added costs on residents on providing more green spaces for a densifying urban center should be shared by those who are actually generating greater income.
I understand your goal and I understand your answer. What I would request is perhaps making it not just 2 or more. Like, I find that a small amount to be adding versus...
Like that it should be 5 or more.
I think what you're I just think it's very minute compared to what your actual goal is. But maybe I'm wrong, so thank you.
Thank you. Are there questions online? No? Please come to the mic.
Thank you. Marie-Hélène, thank you for your presentation. I have a question regarding the presentation that you were giving. Did you give council numbers when it came to the answers? So many were in favor, so many were against, or whatever. Was it quantifiable?
As I explained, the results, it's not just a questionnaire. The results is also the open house that we have, all the question. It was also about the table of discussions that we had. And then it was also all the comments. So you can't concentrate just on the numbers. And also, let's say you have 790 that answered the survey. They didn't answer all the questions. So sometimes it was difficult to pinpoint exactly a number because not everybody answered all the questions.
Right, but did council get numbers?
So no, they had the same information as you have.
Okay, so thank you for that. Some of the things that were not addressed in what we're talking about tonight were connecting fees for developers. We seem to want to be taxing developers for a green fund, which is a one-of-time, whereas connecting to services, which is usage, capacity, if there needs to be more added capacity. When is that going to be visited, and why did we not visit this?
So we did see Jim's comments on those, and they were very interesting. There were other comments as well with regards to TPAC and other improvements that could be done, but those are for different bylaws. So since we're already modifying 5, it would have required modifying another one, which we will do eventually, and improve, of course, contributions to developers in terms of agreements, the agreements with developers, something that has been on our table for a little while, and hopefully we'll get to before the end of term.
Okay. Another thing, too, especially given St. James Church and the fire, secondary buildings was not addressed, even though we're addressing 567, bylaw 567. When will that be addressed?
So with regards to St. James Church and the comment that we saw that you posted online, they're not related to the protection of natural environment, right, which is what we're focused on this evening. In the case of St. James Church, we certainly looked at it, and it is really with regards to acquired rights in the case of something that is infringing on zoning setbacks, which is really not the case of St. James Church. So it'd be really helpful if you didn't sort of scare the population into thinking that there is something that is going to keep that project from happening.
We have validated that with urban planning, that it is considered to be a secondary building, just like anybody that would have 2 buildings.
So as you probably know through Jim, who was on council last term, there was an effort to make some corrections because I believe St. Thomas Church is in the same situation where they have a presbytery, and I don't know what happened and why that wasn't carried forward, but we're aware of it. There are several other properties, but of course we'd be looking more at the churches. I think there's the Manoir Cavagnal that has a similar situation. So it'd be for community sort of use or interest rather than any other. I mean, this is a provision that is in the law that exists across the province, requiring that it's 1 main building per lot, and we will maintain that. So I don't expect that in your particular situation that will be changed, but certainly for the churches porches and for the manoir, that there would be exemptions placed
But a
for those
bylaw
lots.
applies to everybody. It affects everybody that's affected by that bylaw. You can't selectively choose addresses and say,
This is really
building is
about
okay, that
acquired
building
right,
is no.
Louise. It's about
Pardon?
acquired right. And it is something.
So paying taxes is not an acquired right? Does not designate an acquired right when you've paid taxes for over 30 years?
I don't think we're talking about the same acquired right. There is one that is with regards to where your property is situated. And I know you're looking to engage me into an argument at this point. I feel that I've responded to your question.
So I see that this will lead into further litigation for the town because you cannot select when it comes to a bylaw that some buildings are allowed. And I did warn everybody, and I did send all members of council in 2022.
You are spreading
that
fear
St. James,
unnecessarily.
please let me finish, that St. James Church and the rectory, as well as St. Thomas and the Presbytery, were vulnerable to this bylaw interpretation, not the way it's written, because it's never been changed.
Louise, I don't think that you brought
Thanks,
this
Chloe.
to our town for the church in mind. I think you had another property in mind, which belongs to you. Are there any questions online? No, please come to the mic.
Hello, thanks, appreciate it. I think this has been answered, but I just want to confirm that the draft that you have presented here tonight is the draft that we'll be voting on the first Monday of May. There's no modifications based on any questions or anything people bring up to you tonight.
This is still a period. We have a caucus on Monday, so there may be some corrections, some adjustments. That is for us to continue to exchange on. What will be submitted on the town's website in preparation of the council meeting will be that Friday, May 3rd. And at this time, this is where we were ready and based on. I know there were some corrections. I saw a couple of words that could be still improved, but we'll see. Maybe there's some numbers in there that there was one at least that had piqued my curiosity as well. So that is something we'll look into. Maybe the 2.5, we'll have another conversation on that. We certainly had extensive conversations on that. So that is another reason why those were not submitted ahead. This is not a consultation. It's an information process, but we're here and continue to be interested in what everybody has to bring to the table.
Perfect, okay, thank you. So I'm curious, back to the last one we did, when I got up and I asked why we were taxing the few for something that is used by the many, whether it be protection of wetlands, protection of trees, parks, and I understand we're trying to raise funds to protect or to bring up the quality of some of those places. Mm-hmm. And so we are taxing the few and not the many, and I asked why we wouldn't just tax the entire role of the town of Hudson, and now I feel that we've gone and actually now we're taxing the even fewer, and for something that yet the whole population uses or should be interested in protecting.
Sure. So again, having listened to the comments, we've shifted that burden to the developers. So new construction to development, it was our priority to balance the protection of the environment with development. So I feel that in this sense, we've certainly been consistent in our orientations. And with regards to testing on the interest of a general tax, that was certainly one of the questions that was on the survey and that Marie-Hélène gave a report on what the return was. And it was sort of average from memory. It was sort of neither there or not. But know that we are already well taxed. We need to do the most that we can in terms of operations. And taxation usually is for operations. Investment is usually PTI and other loan bylaws and such. But again, these are diversifying the fiscality of municipalities. The government is giving municipalities greater and greater powers each time that they change. So, for example, the increase of fines on tree cutting was a provincial gesture. And it is, again, looking to remind people that the environment is important. They've also changed those permissions with regards to what can be served for contributions for park use and purposes. So they're looking to help us as well, not just to focus our efforts on taxing on property just for living on a certain lot, but if you make changes, then there will be some communicating, des vases communicants, and sort of saying, if you intensify for, and in our case we said for income purposes, then that money will help us make sure that we are able to provide public parks nearby for those people that will be moving to town. That was really where we were headed.
Okay, so I completely agree with you that we are taxed a lot. Thank you for saying that. And I believe on the commercial side, we're taxed even more. So, you know, for someone who owns a commercial property in the center of town, this type of percentage, should I choose to do anything with my property, will affect the overall cost, obviously, of said project, and will then in turn make whatever project that is cost that much more for whoever might be in said project.
Correct.
So in a time when Canada is in a housing shortage and affordable housing even worse, and in a town with an aging population who we have limited ability to have places where people can remain in a town they've been in for many, many years, decades, generations, I find this tax on the few properties that have the ability to potentially build an elderly home or an assisted care living facility would make that cost jump up significantly. And I think, you know, based on the average age in this room, no one take offense, a lot of them are probably coming quick to needing to downsize and look for a place, and there's limited options in Hudson. So a tax, sorry, not a tax, a donation that you guys are, contribution that you guys are looking for on a project of said size would increase the project price significantly and overall making it maybe not affordable for a big portion of the population.
So typically contribution for park, the 10% can be in land, and I don't remember the 20% if it can be in land as well. I think it's maximum.
It's the maximum
of 10% money.
It's a maximum of 10 in money, according to law.
And so the rest can be in park. But if you choose to set that aside for green space, then it's not money necessarily. It's just shortening, reducing your floor plate.
Okay. So, but again, it's still going to either reduce the size of the project by donating land or contribution of land.
Well, looking to concentrate the footprint, right, in order to maintain as much of the natural area.
So overall, it still hurts the individual who wants to hopefully downsize into Hudson in terms of the overall budget, either way you look at it.
Well, I think that there's other factors that are equally difficult, which is the cost of materials, cost of labor, shortage, as you know.
Sure.
And so just to put it on the back of contributions, I don't think is accurate. I think it is just one more element. There are a lot of subsidies out there for housing to keep them affordable. That is certainly something that I've been promoting, and I will continue to look to pair up developers with these contributions on the CMM territory, which we're part of, so the Greater Montreal area. There are programs that enable the town to be refunded for up to 20% of a project that supplies affordable housing. So there are opportunities out there to keep costs down, but meanwhile, we will always need to provide. People are thirsty and hungry for green spaces, as you know. So it is important that we continue to balance development for profit versus the ability to provide a much needed exterior play places.
So hypothetically, if there was a project that would be not taking down any or very few trees and is not in a wetland and would be providing multi-dwelling in the center of town, would the town of Hudson ever provide an exemption for a project of said?
I think it would be rolled into that ability to get that contribution, right? The contribution for subsidized housing or affordable housing.
Okay, so let's go back to this will be my last question. Let's go back to the contribution and what the contribution is going to be used for. So initially it was for parks, wetlands, preservation, stopping cutting of trees. But let's talk about the actual money and a comment that you made a little while ago I believe, if I hope I didn't mishear you, that your attempt is to purchase land in hopes to protect it.
The best way to protect land is to conserve it. And the only way to conserve it without being, blamed for expropriation or called out for expropriation is to purchase. That is a known fact. To purchase land to provide park space, I think, is definitely in the best intentions of the common good.
So I completely agree, and I think that the town should try and purchase more parkland or protect wetlands by purchasing it. I think that's a great initiative. I guess obviously I have an issue with how you're trying to collect the funds to do so. So I'd be curious to know what your projected budget is that you're looking to collect in terms of tax, donation, contribution.
Yeah.
And what you must have a budget in mind. You must have a goal in mind of what you're trying to do. I haven't seen it. Maybe it's been out and I missed it. I apologize if that's the case. But no, it's not out.
No.
Okay. So what is the budget, or what are you attempting to purchase?
So this is exactly why we have started the process with the Plan Directeur, so master plan for parks and green spaces. There's been a lot of asks from people to have, for example, pickleball courts, to have skateboard parks, to purchase sandy beach. There's been all this, but this needs to go through public consultation, participation. So the contract has been awarded. The town has started working with the firm as of last week, I believe. And out of that plan, out of multiple sessions of consultation, there will be prioritizing over what is the vision, where are we headed, and then what is the plan of action, which will be attached with a sense of then what type of investment over how long can be or should be reached for. We know at this time, through the work that we've done with the RCGT firm that we presented, yes, we have a surplus, but we also have a deficit in terms of how much investment has gone into our buildings and into our public assets. So that money at this time is reserved for public infrastructure and not for parks. There's some parks in there, but not as much as what public is asking us to invest in. So that will give us a better framework as to understanding, can we afford it, can't we, what are we prioritizing? And as we mentioned earlier, what we're looking at in terms of revenue is maybe around $100,000 per year. Certainly tracking would need to continue to make sure that that is about what it is. There's not much you can do with $100,000 a year in terms of beautification of the core through planting of trees, of purchasing areas in order to create neighborhood parks. There's some neighborhoods that are crying, asking for more equipment for children. They would like refrigerated ice rink. They would like better baseball diamond. The parks, the chalets at the Benson Park need to be either changed or rebuilt. There's a lot of work that needs to be done with regards to parks. So where is that money going to come from, right? And so this is one of the sources of revenue that is permitted in the law, where a government understands that we need to diversify our sources of revenue.
Okay, and then in terms of potential of purchasing, in your guys' list of opportunities, is there, right now on your list, is there one that has sandy beach? Is that something that you guys are attempting to?
It'd be lovely if we could afford it, but I don't think that, at least during this term, that we will be able to afford it.
Okay, so just one last comment, and I'll leave, is I guess I'll implore, if we can, yourself, you guys, and council, that once again, please don't tax the few. Please tax the group. If we need the funds, if we are in a surplus and we don't need the funds right now, please don't tax us. That would be awesome. But if it's something that's going to be benefited by all of us, please tax all of us. Don't tax the small percentage.
Very good. Thank you. Il y a des questions en ligne? No? Please come to the mic. Madame Perrault, I see that you're lined up. It is already 9 o'clock. You've had your chance. I gave you exhaustive a chance at the microphone. I ask that that be the last one. All right? And you keep it short. Thank you. Monsieur Diane, allez-y.
Oui, bonjour. Je suis arrivé à Hudson il y a 3 ans. On a eu plusieurs discussions avec la Ville pour avoir l'approbation de nos plans. parce qu'on transformait une maison unifamiliale en bigénération. Et aujourd'hui que c'est terminé, les travaux, pas mal, on est très heureux. On est béni d'être avec ma fille et sa famille. Les petits qui viennent nous voir à toute heure du jour, des fois pas de la nuit, mais de la soirée. C'est une vraie bénédiction. Et ma question, c'est, je vois qu'il y a des distinctions au niveau de la contribution, si c'est unifamilial ou multifamilial. De quelle catégorie sera considérée les futures demandes pour des maisons bigénérationnelles? Pas que j'ai l'intention de recommencer l'exercice.
Donc, les bigénérations, c'est considéré un usage additionnel à une résidence unifamiliale. Donc, c'est considéré comme un unifamilial, même si c'est en théorie 2 unités. Là.
À cause des conditions qui s'appliquent, une entrée...
Oui, parce que c'est un usage additionnel, qu'effectivement, il y a des conditions qu'il faut que ça soit un lien de parenté. C'est pas considéré comme un deuxième unité au niveau de la réglementation. Donc, ce ne serait pas sujet à la contribution.
Ça ne se serait pas appliqué à votre projet.
Ouais. J'ai une autre question. J'aimerais qu'on retourne dans les slides à l'endroit où vous présentiez options 1 et 2 au niveau des terrains et de... Merci. Nous, chez nous, on est plus la situation 2. Par contre, le terrain est déboisé et plus petit que ça. Il n'y a pas de piscine. Et on souhaite installer une shed. Et ce que je semble voir, c'est que vu que c'est l'option 2, il faudrait mettre la shed où est la piscine dans l'illustration qu'on voit ici. Là. Quand on a 3 petits-enfants qui courent, avoir la shed au milieu de la cour, ça ne me semble pas une bonne idée. Là. Fait que j'essaie de voir qu'est-ce qui s'appliquerait là. Donc, le terrain 2, mais il y a des arbres partout autour. Il y a juste la place où il y a la piscine qui est libre. Et puis, il n'y a pas de piscine.
Au niveau des modifications apportées, l'idée, c'est d'implanter où il y a le moins d'abattage. Mais c'est sûr et certain qu'il va y avoir une analyse qui va être faite avec probablement quelqu'un de la ville, avec vous. On va aller vous visiter. Puis on va chercher, dans le fond, une solution pour pour abattre le moins d'arbres possible, puis conserver. On est toujours en esprit de conservation, puis de durabilité et, dans le fond, de couper le moins d'arbres possible.
Donc, ça, vous me dites, c'est que c'est pas 1 ou 2, il y a la flexibilité dans le système.
Bien, faut aller voir sur place. Là. On peut pas, du cas par cas, au bout comme ça, vous dites la piscine, on met ça, je pense qu'il faut aller sur place, puis l'analyser avec le propriétaire, puis voir comment ça peut se passer.
Merci.
Merci. Une question, ma chère.
Le fait que vous semblez avoir dit qu'il y avait encore un petit peu d'ouverture avant le 6 mai, fait que je voulais juste vous inviter parce que je pense que c'est la chose importante. Là, si vous relisez la consultation publique à la page 21, là, le vrai chiffre, il faut que vous reteniez, là, c'est que 65% des répondants qui ont largement rejeté le fait d'élargir les catégories pour la contribution pour fin de parc, terrain de jeu et espace vert. Ces chiffres-là qu'il faut vous rappeler. C'est que les gens ne sont pas pour ça. Vous l'avez entendu ce soir. Tout le monde trouve ça injuste. Alors, ça va être un petit peu, en tout cas...
Mais j'aimerais préciser que c'est pour l'ajout de catégories. Hein? Donc, c'est
un ajout de catégorie, la raison unifamiliale. C'est un ajout.
Mais je vais quand même parler.
Oui, oui.
Donc, c'est pas pour l'annulation complète des contributions, mais c'est par rapport...
C'est ça le projet, c'est qu'il y en a déjà des contributions pour fin de parc, Mme Hutchison. Votre nouveau règlement, c'est d'ajouter des catégories, puis c'est ça que je vous dis, c'est qu'on n'en veut pas des nouvelles catégories. Alors moi, je pense simplement...
Je vous ai donné l'opportunité de poser une question, vous ne l'avez pas posée. Je vous demanderai de conclure votre intervention.
Alors, je vais conclure en disant que je vous invite vraiment à... En tout cas, ça va être un petit peu, pour moi, un test pour savoir est-ce que le conseil municipal écoute ses citoyens, entend ses citoyens, et puis ben, on aura la réponse avec le règlement que vous adopterez, mais je vous invite fortement à voir là, qu'il y a une grosse opposition à ce qu'on facture les petits finalement, parce qu'une unifamiliale, c'est un petit.
Merci, Madame Perrault, ça a été fait. Merci. Please come to the microphone.
Hi, my name is Gary Bosch. I live in Hudson, Maple. There's a lot of people that want to retire here because they've lived here all their lives. Their kids grew up here, and they would like to retire here. But at the moment, if you're thinking of going into a condo in Hudson, bring $600,000 with you, or don't bother, because that's what the prices are right now. And this is going to make it even more expensive. If I would win the lottery and build a sixplex in Hudson, say it's $6 million, apart from paying outrageous property taxes, way higher than Bay Durfee, imagine, or I think even Beaconsfield, for the same value, I'm going to get hit with $120,000 in welcome taxes. Apart from this new tax, I have to call it a tax because I can't get it through my head that it's a contribution. It's just, that's misleading. But did anybody come to consider that there's a housing crisis, that we don't have enough houses? We cannot retain our own people here. They have to move to Vaudreuil, or they have to move elsewhere because they can't stay here because we're not encouraging builders to come here. And this is making it just worse. I deal with builders all the time. I know what they're saying. It's impossible to build in Hudson. They don't even want to try it because you can't get through to City Hall. Nobody's picking up the phone. It's not good. It could be better. It could definitely be better.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank
One
you. I know it's
last.
close. Yes.
And then we will close.
So I think I would just want to say I implore you as well, now that I know that there's an opening. And I would like the council and everybody involved to keep one number in mind. With everything that's going on with this bylaw, it's $100,000. So thank you. Just keep $100,000 in your mind. You really want these concerns that are very real in a very discriminatory environment, which is what it is, for $100,000.
I wish we wouldn't use extreme language such as
so discriminatory.
Excuse me, I was speaking.
Yes, sorry.
And if we're going to use the number of 100,000, and if we're going to use the fact that that probably covers, I don't know, let's say around 40 new units for 1 year, which is really not going to be repeated at long term, that distributed over the number of doors is perhaps $1,000 per door. So just let's try and keep things within proportion.
For sure.
Let's think about this and also think what is the cost of the loss of the services that are provided by our natural environment. I'm sorry, let's try and keep it to that. I invite you to reach out to me by email.
The 100,000 that I was referring to is not that. The 100,000 I'm referring is to what the new tax is going to bring into the town. That's the 100,000. So
and there are costs associated to new doors as well. So it's not a net gain. All right. So thank you very much.
Small group is discriminated.
One intervention it was. So thank you very much for everyone's participation. As mentioned, I believe it was Jim Duff who said the quality of participation in this town is remarkable. We continue to hope that you will continue to join us in future consultation processes. There are several coming up. The Parks Plan is one. The Cultural Policy is another one. And even though these are uncomfortable periods for us, obviously, it is important to us that you continue to buy into our process, that you help them make them better. Yes, there are still a few days for us to consider some of the comments that were brought. We'll discuss those around the decisional or the preparatory table of caucus next Monday. It is important that we hear you, but I also ask that you do so in respect towards us. This is not an easy position to be in. Change is always uncomfortable, and we want to do it in a way that is respectful to you, but also conscious of the climate change and the requirement that people have higher expectations towards public space and public places for them to have recreation, quality of their equipment, the installations, and that is a burden that indeed we should be sharing by all, and some of that is, but we will continue those exchanges through the Parks Plan and future consultations. So thank you everyone for being here this evening, thank you for being online, and thank you to our technical team and to Marie-Hélène Gauthier for having accompanied us in this process. Thank you.